Joining me now, former Florida Congressman. He's Executive Director of the National Center for Policy Analysis. He is Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Good to see you, Colonel.
Good to be with you, Liz.
Not much agreement today with Russia, but Tillerson did get a meeting with Putin, and both agreed that relations are at historic lows. So what about that? Where do we go from here?
Well, Liz, I think that we could have come to that assessment without the travel of Secretary of State Tillerson to Russia. If you think about it, just 2 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin invited in the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, and they had 2 days of talks as opposed to 2 hours of talks. And I watched the C-SPAN hearing or the C-SPAN debate of the UN Security Council today, and what you saw was a very belligerent, a very obtuse deputy ambassador to the United Nations from Russia, and they really just washed their hands. And as you said, Russia voted no against that resolution to condemn Syria. So I know that we're talking about opening up lines of communications and dialogue, but you have to look at the actions of Russia. You have to look at their actions with Crimea, their actions with the Ukraine, their actions putting pressure on the Baltic states. And of course, they were well aware of what Bashar al-Assad is doing in Syria to his own people. And in many ways, they've been very complicit.
You know, a recent CBS poll shows that almost half of Americans support President Trump's action in Syria. Trump again said no plan for ground troops in Syria. Now, the media and the Democrats have been saying, oh, you know, Trump wants to invade Syria. He's saying, no, we don't want to invade Syria. No ground troops. What are your thoughts there?
Well, the thing is, we actually do have ground troops in Syria, but those ground troops, a Marine Expeditionary Unit and also an Army Ranger element, they're focused on Raqqa. They're focused on defeating the Islamic State, which is something that Vladimir Putin had previously said that he was going to do, as well as Vladimir Putin lied about the fact that there is not a 100% eradication of chemical weapons in Syria. So I, again, don't know why we're talking about opening up a line of communication with someone that has been quite deceptive with us in this entire time. So, no, the Trump administration should not be looking at deposing Bashar al-Assad. They should not be looking at regime change. What they should do is make sure that any time Bashar al-Assad does use his military capability capacity against innocent civilians, they should take the exact same actions, and they need to put up some type of no-fly zone or safe zone over those innocent civilians.
Yeah, Colonel, you know, Russia's foreign minister said that, you know, they do need to repair relations with the U.S., deteriorated, that he noted, under Obama over the last couple of years. So in that context, Secretary Tillerson, it looks like he had a tough go of it today. Was he tough enough today with Russia?
I would have not even gone to Russia. I have to be very honest. And the relations between the United States and Russia have deteriorated because of the previous administration saying that they would have more flexibility after their reelection. And Vladimir Putin took advantage of that in every way, shape, form, and fashion. So I think one of the things we need to do is look at diplomatically how we can bring more pressure to bear against Vladimir Putin, strengthen our relationships with NATO.
You know, there's clearly an indication that we're seeing here that people are scared that, you know, for example, one analysis had it that the number of Google searches for World War III on the rise. You know, people are anxious about this. But, Colonel, I think it needs to be stressed that the Cold War never turned into a shooting war, right?
Well, you had proxy fights during the Cold War. Russia and the United States of America never met against each other on the battlefield. And, of course, there was the understanding of mutually assured destruction, the MAD theory, where we really were not going to launch nuclear strikes against each other. But I do think that we have a proxy war that is developing, just the same as we supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the Soviet-Afghan War as a means to bring them down, and the same as the Soviet Union supported North Vietnam, and they also supported North Korea.
Good point. Let's turn to this next topic. President Trump telling our own Maria Bartiromo that he ended up informing China's President Xi Jinping about the Syria missile strike over dessert over chocolate cake. Let's take a listen.
He's eating his cake, and he was silent.
Headed to Syria?
Yes, heading toward Syria. In other words, we've just launched 1,500 missiles heading toward Syria. And I want you to know that. Because I didn't want him to go home. We're almost finished. It was a full day in Palm Beach. We're almost finished. And what does he do? Finish his dessert and go home. And then they say, you know, the guy you just had dinner with just attacked the country.
How did he react?
So he paused for 10 seconds. And then he asked the interpreter to please say it again. I didn't think that was a good sign. And he said to me, anybody that uses gases, you could almost say, or anything else, but anybody that was so brutal and uses gases, to do that to young children and babies, it's okay.
He agreed.
He was okay with it.
Okay, that's the news. In other words, Colonel, the media is hammering the president for informing China's president over dessert. But the news is, and buried in this news, and you're not going to see this a lot elsewhere, is that China, according to the president, was okay with the missile strike in Syria. And we just reported that China has condemned Syria and supports a UN investigation into Syria chemical weapons. Look at what happened today at the UN. I mean, usually, Colonel, China votes with Russia, but China abstained today. I mean, this looks like, again, the media not doing its job covering the story.
Well, you're absolutely right. I would have preferred if China had voted with the United States for this resolution against Syria instead of just abstaining. But once again, we hear a lot of talk from the Chinese leader. I was stationed in North and South Korea back in 1995, and we have always heard China with rhetoric, but they have never done anything to rein in their client state, which is North Korea. And the North Korean regime and the leaders, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, have done incredible, horrific things against their own humanity. I mean, the secret prison camps and the starvation that is going on there. But what the reaction you have seen from China is that they put 150,000 of their troops along its border with North Korea to prevent any refugees from fleeing that area. They're not taking an action to bring down Kim Jong-un. What they're doing is trying to protect their own interests and their own border. So I think that with President Trump coming out and now saying that he is not going to declare China as a currency manipulator, we're giving them something, but yet we haven't seen anything from China yet.
You know, here's what's going on there, too, Colonel. And to your point, is that now, you know, South Korea is saying, you know, don't be worried, world. We have it under control. China's saying it's taking action. It's going to buy U.S. coal instead of North Korea coal. Where does this end up?
Well, it ends up at some point in time, we cannot allow Kim Jong-un to stay there. He is another one of these genocidal maniacs. We know what he has done with his uncle, with his half-brother, and with other key leaders in North Korea. We know that this is an erratic, unstable individual who has violated all of the international norms as far as nuclear weapons tests and ballistic missiles.
All right, another surprising development. President Trump now saying he does want to repeal and replace Obamacare before moving on to tax reform, hopefully before the congressional recess. Let's take a listen.
We are going to have tax reform at some point very soon. I think we're doing very well on health care. It's been very much misreported that we failed with health care. We haven't failed. We're negotiating, and we continue to negotiate. And we will save perhaps $900 billion. So we're going to have a phenomenal tax reform, but I have to do health care first. I want to do it first to really do it right.
Meantime, Freedom Caucus Chair Mark Meadows, he and the Freedom Caucus blocked the last reform attempt, but he's now changing his tune.
We're very close. I think the biggest thing for all of us is that we want to not only make sure that we have repeal, but that we have a replacement that drives down insurance premiums. And if we don't drive down insurance premiums, we will have failed.
All right, Colonel, does Congress have enough time to do both?
Well, I think that when you look at the fact that Congress is on a 2-week Easter recess instead of just taking maybe a weekend, they're putting the pressure on themselves. And this arbitrary thing about an August recess, I don't know why you're taking a recess when you have the issues going on in the Middle East, the issues going on in the Pacific Rim, the issues with our tax and health care reform. There's a lot of things that have to be done, and we haven't even talked about the debt ceiling vote that has to come about and our rise in debt and deficits. So there's a lot of things that Congress needs to do. They need to be up there in Washington, D.C. getting this thing figured out. And the last thing that I think anyone wants to see happen is in October, when Americans open up their new health insurance premium statements for the next year, they continue to see an increase. And I think I have to agree with Mark Meadows on that.
Yeah, maybe that's when they get Obamacare reform. Okay, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Colonel Alan West, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Next up, President Trump revealing